So, warm welcome. I'm Christina Pack with the Asian Development Bank, and I'll be your MC along with my colleague, Professor Nick Briner. So this event is at the inaugural Forest Pavilion, and it's one of the series of events we're having. But today's event is focused on the role of the law in saving forests. So may I first introduce Dr. Juliette Bial. She is the director of the UN Forum on Forest Secretariat and really the person that made this inaugural Forest Pavilion possible. So, Dr. Bial.
Thank you very much, Christina. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations Forum on Forest Secretariat, I'm really honored to join you today. I extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to participate to this important event. Today's discussion brings a crucial focus on the role of judicial and legal systems alongside good governance in advancing sustainable forest management and conservation. Strong, effective legal frameworks are essentials in preventing and prosecuting illegal activities like logging and land grabbing, ensuring that laws protect forests, biodiversity, and natural resources are upheld. Clearing legal definition of property rights and land tenure are equally crucial, and they encourage responsible forest management, attract investments, and secure necessary funding for conservation efforts. Good governance plays a vital role in ensuring that funds for forest conservation reach the right stakeholders, including local communities. Governance practices, transparency, accountability, and inclusive stakeholder participation help build trust with investors and donors, encouraging their ongoing commitment to conservation goals. The Model Forest Act initiative offers an adaptable framework that supports countries in strengthening their judicial and legal system for forest governance. By leveraging this framework, countries can improve enforcement of forest protection laws, establish secure land tenure, and mitigate risk associated with forest-related investment, ultimately supporting sustainable forest management. To place these issues in a global context, it is essential to recognize the interconnectedness of forests, sustainable development, climate change action. Forests are crucial for mitigating climate change, conserving biodiversity, and supporting sustainable development goals. Forests provide up to 30% of the solution needed to address climate crisis. They are home to 80% of terrestrial biodiversity and provide livelihood, food, medicine, and materials for over 1.6 billion people worldwide. Despite global commitment, we are still witnessing a devastating loss of approximately 10 million hectares of forests each year. This ongoing deforestation and degradation highlights the need for more robust and effective action to fulfill global commitment to climate change mitigation and sustainable development. A significant barrier to reversing this trend is the lack of adequate financial resources, which weakens efforts toward afforestation, reforestation, and other initiatives critical to forest preservation. In this context, I would like to draw your attention to some few areas for global collective action. First, we must place forests at the forefront of the political agenda to achieve the global forest goals, which are essential for driving climate action, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable development. Second, we must strengthen judicial and legal system along with good governance related to forests. This is essential for combating illegal deforestation and promoting responsive forest management, an objective that benefits us all. Finally, we must drastically increase financing forest-based solutions for our shared challenges. For this to succeed, countries must also build strong judicial and legal systems to create and enable environment that attracts long-term investments in forests. To this end, the UNFF Secretariat, through its Global Forest Financing Facilitation Network, will continue to work together with all stakeholders to build necessary policy framework and enabling environment to boost forest financing. Dear colleagues, today's event will provide valuable insight into how we can improve legal frameworks for forest conservation through initiatives like the Model Forest Act. Let us remember the importance of this issue in the global context and the collective action required to protect forests worldwide. I wish you all a productive meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Biao, for those remarks and for welcoming us here to this event and for introducing all of us here and the important topics that we'll discuss today on the Global Forest Goals and the Model Forest Act initiative. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our high-level opening panel with many of the partners that make the Model Forest Act initiative work from across the world and from various different institutions. So let me first pass the time over to Chief Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin, who is Chief Justice of the National High Court of Brazil and the chair of the Model Forest Act initiative and the president of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment.
Well, many thanks for being here, and thank you, Professor Nicholas Breiner, for the introduction. I'll be very brief because I'll be speaking later on the substance of the Model Forest Act initiative. And as one of the co-organizers of this event, of the two events that we have, I would like only to thank the different partners. First, our host, the United Nations Forum on Forest, and the director, she was here, oh, there she is, Juliette Biao. She's a force of nature, we all know that, and we are delighted to partner with you and with UNFF, with your team, which is an excellent team. Second, I would like also to thank two key people, and we both of them have already sort of opened this event. Christina Pack, Principal Counsel from the Asian Development Bank, and Professor Nicholas Breiner, who has the microphone in his hands. And you are two of the many people that put together those events. And finally, being a Brazilian, I would like to thank the government of Brazil, and especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. This event would not be possible without the direct contribution from the government of Brazil. You will probably see that several of the Supreme Court justice and key partners have badges, party of the Brazilian delegation, and this is quite unusual. So I would like to thank Ambassador Figueiredo, who will be speaking soon, but also Marco Tulio, who's sitting here, and the whole group of the Secretariat of the Environment, Climate Change, and Energy. Later on, I will say a few more words on the Model Forest Act initiative, but for the moment, it's just to thank all of you and the speakers, the partners, and the participants of those two events. Many thanks.
Thank you, Justice Benjamin. Thank you for your leadership, and obrigado for all of your support for these events. Next, we'll hear from Ambassador Luis Alberto Figueiredo Machado, who is the special envoy of the government of Brazil on climate change.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is indeed a pleasure being here. I'm very honored to participate in this event led by people that care about forests, that care about the environment, and that are fighting the good fight and the long fight in order to protect our environment, and in this specific case, our forests. I would like briefly to speak about the relationship between this issue and climate, which is a self-evident relationship, but it is important to realize that the fight against climate change in recent years changed a little bit from a very abstract consideration of a reduction of emissions to now a more focused consideration of the real need in order to fight climate change, meaning the necessary transformation of energy matrices around the world and the reduction of fossil fuels. Last year in Dubai, for the first time, fossil fuels was present in the COP in terms of pointing to solutions. In the past, it was only forests. Forests was the big culprit. Forest was the, and that's striking. Forest was pointed at as a major source, I mean deforestation, a major source of emissions that would cause climate change, and nobody spoke about fossil fuels. Finally, we are balancing this act, keeping the importance of fighting deforestation, but at the same time making it clear that even if we stop completely deforestation, the climate will still be suffering from fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels. And at that time in the past, it was said that it was easier to combat deforestation and cheaper than to act on energy matrices or energy transitions. And the point that we finally made was that no, it isn't cheaper and it isn't easier to combat deforestation than to change the energy matrix. It is as costly as changing as costly as moving away from fossil fuels. And this will bring us to the point the main point that I would like to make, it is fundamentally a question of assembly funds, providing financing, because this is a long fight, this is a strong fight. It's not only a question of getting to a forest and saying, no, you cannot cut. No, you have to provide an alternative for the livelihoods of those that are in the forest, that those that depend on the forest. You have to provide the means for the population to live without cutting trees. And that's not easy, that's not cheap, and it is a total economic transformation. The same kind of economic transformation as it is needed to move away from fossil fuels. So this sector needs badly financing. And one of the key issues when we talk about financing is the correct atmosphere that would attract investors, that would create an environment of trust. And that's where, in my mind, this global partnership to improve the legal protection of native forests comes, because it will provide a solid legal basis in many countries around the world so that the correct legal environment is in place, so that it will attract the attention of the investors. It will make access to money easier, and in the end it will contribute, again going back to the issue, this will contribute to our collective fight against climate change. That is my main message, but I would not like to stop here without saying that forests are much more important than climate change alone. I am talking about climate change because we are in a climate change COP, but forests are much more than that, but you know that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Figueiredo. I'd like to turn the time over next to Thomas Clark, who's the General Counsel of the Asian Development Bank.
Thank you very much, Nick. And let me, first of all, be welcoming of all of you here, and particularly to recognize the great work that has been done by the Global Judicial Institute on the environment. Particularly thank the Honorable Chief Justice Antonio Benjamin, honorable justices, judges from around the world, Ambassador Figueiredo Mercado, thank you for your remarks just now, and of course, Dr. Juliet Bao. Without all of you, and without all of you fellow stewards of the earth who are here, we have no hope of addressing this absolutely existential crisis. Now, as we know, we're involved in a triple planetary crisis, one of pollution, one of biodiversity loss, and one of climate change. And for all of these, the forests, nature in general, and particularly forests, are absolutely critical. You need to have a multifaceted approach because the forests are integrally involved in all of these crises. And thank you very much, Ambassador Mercado, because as you rightly noted, it is not just for climate, but it is for so many other aspects, including biodiversity, including pollution, including the sustainable development of indigenous peoples, that the forests are absolutely critical. So for these reasons, the Asian Development Bank is delighted to co-host this important event, with the government of Brazil, many thanks. As you pointed out, Justice Benjamin has been so helpful, the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, and many other partners, including the EU Forum of Judges for the Environment, the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, and the UN Environment Program, and the International Council of Environmental Law. You know it's an existential crisis when all of these institutions come together in the recognition that we need to do more, so much, much more, to achieve our goals. Now, as we stated, the problems that we face are multifaceted. And so it's just momentous to be here with all of you at this inaugural Forest Pavilion, because it makes me feel we really do have a chance with all of these minds, with all of these people with passion and spirit dedicated to addressing this problem. It's a platform to mobilize partners to work toward the global forest goals, which also help to achieve the Paris Agreement ambitions. Now, as we know, the forests are essential in saving the climate crisis from becoming worse, of solving it, of ensuring inclusive and sustainable development. But what are the roadblocks to this? Well, I guess you could accuse me of being a lawyer, and when you have a hammer, every problem is a nail. But I think it is no exaggeration here to say that insufficient legal frameworks act as one of the significant barriers in meeting this goal. For example, in the Asia-Pacific region where ADB operates, many forest laws are outdated. They are no longer suitable to address the 21st century challenges, such as climate change and biodiversity loss. Now, that's understandable because many of these laws were enacted long ago in times when climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss simply were not seen. Hard for us to imagine it now, but they simply were not seen as issues of eminent concern. And furthermore, existing forest laws just have not kept pace with the more recent multilateral environmental agreements and other international instruments, such as the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. So consequently, there is a growing recognition that modernizing a country's forest legal framework is absolutely a critical policy tool to stop deforestation and forest degradation and to enable sustainable management and the utilization of forests. And this is where, the law becomes critical, because national legal frameworks are and will continue to be the backbone of global action on climate change and environmental and biodiversity protection, and they will underpin action locally. So the international agreements are critical, but transmuting into national law these obligations, these requirements, and particularly in the sensitive area of forest protection is critical. So we must have 21st century solutions for our 21st century challenges, and including legal solutions. It's therefore critical that global forest laws rise to this modern challenge. Therefore, ADB believes that the Model Forest Act initiative can really be transformational. If I just step back for a minute and I say, we're a development bank. Now you may say, why is a development bank getting involved in helping countries improve their legal frameworks? Well, it's true we're a bank. It's true we're under a lot of pressure to up the game in terms of financing climate. If you heard Lord Stern on Wednesday release the IH-Leg report, MDBs are expected to contribute another $270 billion in climate finance. That's important. Money is important. But what I'm here to tell you is, at least at ADB and other institutions, we increasingly see it's not just money, it's being the solutions partner, it's being the knowledge partner, and it's helping with things like the Model Forest Act that will allow our developing member countries to improve and update the legal framework to accommodate these solutions. And we again believe the Model Forest Act, MoFAI, is a very good example of this. It is a systematic way to provide expertise, efficiency, and the scale required to match the severity and the urgency of the global forest crisis. And make no mistake, we're not looking at this as a one-size-fits-all answer, but the brilliance of MoFAI is that we're looking at the different countries and different legal systems. It's going to allow a sort of plug and play where different legal systems can be accommodated, but the end will be the same: the protection of forests, the incorporation of that into national law. Friends, in conclusion, MoFAI, the Model Forest Act initiative, is a great example of coordinated multilateral collaboration to advance the global public good for which leadership by the development community can have a truly meaningful impact. Forests are not just carbon sinks, but rather they have inspired us as human beings at every level: economic, physical, spiritual, and they keep giving, and we have an ongoing duty to care for them responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. And we'll now turn to hear from another multilateral development bank, Michael Strauss, the General Counsel of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Tom, I should have learned long ago never to follow you. One of the things that I love about working with Tom on issues like this is that his passion is evident, and he is a leader in this field. So we're very, very lucky to have Tom here, and I'm very lucky to be a fellow GC of an MDB. I will talk a little bit first about who EBRD is, and I think it's relevant specifically coming after Tom about what makes us a little bit different from the other development banks he referred to in the community. We, first of all, we were founded in the 1990s and are based in London, where we work specifically on development mainly focused on the private sector, and our region that we cover is originally the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. Now we also work in Middle East, North Africa, and are expanding into Sub-Saharan Africa. Why those facts are important? Because, as Tom said, forests are a global public good. We, as an institution, predominantly work in the private sector. What that means in practice is that when we do projects, they need to have a rate of return for us to be able to invest in them, and we also need to be able to work with private sector partners who want to invest. It makes it significantly more complex for us to work on nature and work on forests for that reason. I'll get to that in a minute, but I did want to, on the other side, note that the bank, in its history, the bank's charter actually committed us from the outset. Our treaty ensures that development and environmentally sound and sustainable investment is part of what we do and must be part of what we do. And that commitment is particularly relevant for our regions because they're among the most carbon intensive in the world. What that means, in practice, is that we actually have an enormous opportunity in this region because there's so much we can do to actually decarbonize those economies, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. All of EBRD's activities, and this is, I think, incredibly important because we were among the first to do this, all of our activities have been Paris-aligned since the the beginning of 2023. That's an incredibly intensive process to ensure that we never do a project that is not Paris-aligned, and we have absolutely no out to that. If we see a project that we want to do that isn't Paris-aligned, we can't do it. We screen projects systematically for that purpose, and we include adaptation elements as well in that work. In addition to project-level support, though, EBRD supports country investment platforms. I'll mention a little bit more about that in a minute, but let me give you one example, which is North Macedonia's country platform. This was launched at the COP28, and it's a vehicle for investment and policy development as it targets the complete phase-out of coal-fired power. We've deployed 1.7 gigawatts of renewable energy that will be done by 2030, grid storage investments for energy security, and just transition measures to support communities affected by the green transition. Now, that's just one example. We're doing similar platform work in Turkey. We're doing similar platform work in Egypt, and we'll be doing it in many other countries as well along these lines. But you came here to hear about nature and forests, not about all the investments that we're doing in clean energy. Of course, they're related, but alongside other MDBs, the EBRD is increasingly committed to addressing the interconnected crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Through policy, financial products, capacity building, we are aligning our investments and our operations with climate and nature-positive goals. The EBRD and other MDBs, like Tom has said, have collectively undertaken actions and initiatives for nature-positive finance along mainly 4 lines. The first is the Joint Commitment for Nature-Positive Finance. The Joint Statement on Nature, People and Planet was introduced at COP26, and we, of course, as an MDB, were a signatory to that. And the intention there is to mainstream nature in policies, advice, and investment decisions at these institutions. The second are the common principles for identification and tracking of nature-positive finance. This will help mainstream biodiversity into all of our portfolios. The third is the joint stocktake on biodiversity-related KPIs. And this may sound like alphabet soup. I think it's incredibly important because we have to measure what we do and know that we're achieving the outcomes that we're aiming to do. If it isn't measured, it isn't done, particularly when it comes to finance for climate. This will support the development of new biodiversity strategies, action plans, financial plans in various countries, ensuring that these indicators fall into our decision making, as I mentioned. And finally, fourth, country-led platforms for nature, going back to the one I mentioned before. The types of platforms we've been doing recently have not been nature-driven. New ones will be, which I'm excited about. We will encourage nature-positive investments by focusing on areas such as climate adaptation, energy transition within country-led platforms. We're now expanding these platforms to integrate these nature-positive strategies. At COP28 in Dubai, EBRD introduced its first public approach to nature, reaffirming its dedication to global biodiversity framework. This approach involves protecting biodiversity, investing in ecosystem regeneration, and disclosing biodiversity data, ensuring that EBRD's actions align with international nature-positive goals. On top of this, the EBRD just approved last month a new environmental and social policy. Tom, you're behind us a little bit on this one, but you'll be there soon. That will protect nature. And even more, it will do so even more than it did in the past. We will invest in projects that reduce pressures on biodiversity and find opportunities to regenerate ecosystems within the work that we do. Finally, we will disclose biodiversity data, and this is, again, very important because that type of transparency is utterly essential for you to be able to hold us accountable for the work we do on nature. We'll do this through international sustainability reporting and through public data sharing initiatives like the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the GBIF. I can't get off the stage without mentioning two things related to our work in nature and forests that I think is very important. The first is the Corporate Climate Governance Facility. EBRD put in place a donor-funded facility to assist companies in embedding climate and nature-related risks into their strategies and operations. This is designed to ensure that these considerations are integrated with financial objectives. The team supports clients to enhance their climate governance, risk management, and climate-related disclosures. In addition, through training and resources, the CCGF enables boards to incorporate sustainability into strategic planning and foster a culture of climate resilience and sustainable governance. Again, as I said, we mainly focus on work in the private sector. We must get the private sector to move in the direction of proper governance relative to the climate, but also proper disclosure. Second is our legal policy reforms and policy development support. And here we work very closely alongside Christina and Tom at the ADB. We work closely with governments to integrate climate and nature considerations into their legal frameworks, to create robust guidelines for sustainable investment. These frameworks guide both domestic and international capital flows towards projects that contribute positively to biodiversity and climate goals. And specifically, we have a team of lawyers who I think do the best work in the world. They are the legal transition team, which is a key part of the legal department that I lead. They work closely with financial regulators and policymakers to unlock investment opportunities in the green economy. They support the integration of climate risk management into financial policies and regulations and transparency around data. We help policymakers and regulators manage the financial risk posed by climate change, strengthening the resilience of financial systems, ensuring that investments are sustainable, and ensuring that they're aligned with long-term environmental sustainability. I will leave it there, but happy to talk to you afterwards a bit more about what we do at EBRD. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And last but not least on this panel of opening statements, I'll turn the time over to Andrea Mesa Murillo, who's the Deputy Executive Secretary for the UN Convention to Combat Desertification.
Thank you, and being the last in this impactful panel is really a challenge. So thank you to the organizers, UNFF, to the Honorable Chief of Justice Antonio Benjamin, and to all the partners. And as one of the three Rio conventions, UNCCD is really joining this initiative because we are clear that we cannot achieve the goals of this convention that are basically to manage, to restore, and to protect land and the different ecosystems. And forest is a critical ecosystems. We all know that. And that we will not achieve climate targets if we don't protect our forest, if we don't protect nature. And based on this vision is why UNCCD is joining this initiative. We think, and we have seen in different countries, and I'm from Costa Rica, so it's really one of the examples where we have seen how important it is to have good policy coherence, good enabling legal and policy frameworks. And the history of transforming the big trend that we had on deforestation in the country really started with the issuing of one law, that it was the forest law at that moment that prohibited land use change, but that also created the incentives, right? The payment of environmental services scheme at that time, among other important legal reforms, working with the judicial system, and working and enhancing and creating this enabling environment. But I want to take one of the points that the ambassador made and going in the next COP in Brazil. Nature cannot be the cheap solution. Nature, and we need to give more value to nature. And to do this, we need these enabling environments. We need these right policies and these legal transformations. And to move into that direction, again, it's another element that I want to bring to this. And we're trying to elevate this narrative. We're hearing a lot about this just energy transition. But when we're talking about land as well, we need to talk about this just transition as well. So it's about this just land transition as well, talking about how are we going to be mobilizing the resources to the communities that are protecting the forest. What are we doing in the landscape management in transforming the food systems to avoid the pressure on the forest as well? And to do this, we need to also generate jobs, we need to mobilize resources, and to give the right incentives to the system. So this is basically why, as UNCCD, we're joining this initiative, the Model Forest Act initiative. We look forward to scale up this work in the different countries and to really have an impact very soon and accelerate action on the ground. Thank you for the initiative, Honorable Judge. Thank you to everyone who's making this possible. And looking forward, in 2 weeks we will have our COP in Saudi Arabia, and the Kingdom, as incoming presidency, also wants to scale up this vision, and it's a very good opportunity as well to find new innovative mechanisms, because we will not address this if we don't give the real economic value to nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And once again, thank you to all of the speakers at this distinguished panel. Another round of applause for all of them. I'll turn the time back over to Christina to give us a transition to our next panel.
Excellent. So the opening speakers, please take your seats back, and then we'll call to the stage our panel one speakers. So Chief Justice Antonio Benjamin can remain. And then we have Ronaldo Sembiring, the Executive Director of the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. If you could come up to the stage. And then we have Gustavo. You're still on the stage to talk about MoFAI, Chief Justice. Thank you, Ambassador. So we also have Gustavo Alanis Ortega. He's the President of the Mexican Center for Environmental Law. And then I'm not sure if Tristan Tyrell has me. Oh, there you are. Excellent, Tristan. Welcome. So Tristan is from the Convention on Biological Diversity. I think while the plenary one speakers take the stage, all of you have been wondering, what is this Model Forest Act initiative? What is MoFAI? And this is what this panel will delve into, is to really explain to you what MoFAI is, how it works, and what's really involved in more detail. Excellent. So I'm going to introduce, again, the Honorable Chief Justice Antonio Benjamin. He's actually the president of the Model Forest Act Initiative, but of course he holds the presidency of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, and is also a Chief Justice of the National High Court of Brazil. But Chief Justice Benjamin, if you could take this podium and kind of like tell us about MoFAI, how it started, and what the key features are, to explain to the audience that are probably wondering what is this MoFAI is.
Well, many thanks to all of you, and especially to you, Christina. My role here is very simple, and I'll try to make it even more simple. It's to give a panorama of MoFAI. You all have the brochure. We spent a lot of time drafting, redrafting this brochure. It's changing permanently. It's always in flux, because we want to condense the information about at least an overview of what the Model Forest Act initiative is. And perhaps I should start with a little bit of history, how this concept came to life. When I was chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, and I was chair for 9 years, I would frequently get requests from governments, from parliaments of countries, when they were drafting new forest legislation. Sometimes it was a complete new forest act. Sometimes it was the reform of an existing act. And then they would approach us and ask for help. And the answer was always no. No, for several reasons. First, because in the Commission we are all volunteers, so we have our day jobs. And drafting legislation does require a lot of time, especially in complex areas like the protection of forests, or even more complex, the protection of flora. Second, because it is quite risky, because if we do it right, then in those countries we will not even be mentioned. That's fine with us. But if we do it wrong, we will be blamed for having a country enacting legislation that is imperfect or might be, in some parts of it, entirely wrong. And third, because legislation is not just legislation. Legislation is supposed to impact life, and legislation is the foundation for the jurisprudence that judges will, through cases that are decided, will then build on around that specific piece of legislation. So imagine us 5 years, 10 years after this act being approved, saying, I'm so sorry, but we did it wrong. So those were some of the concerns that we had. And then I came up with the idea of having a Model Forest Act. And then we added the term initiative, that's MoFAI. And MoFAI is precisely that. It's a global exercise, not just by law experts, but scientists too. So for the very first time, we have scientists and law experts from common law, civil law, from all over the world, meeting in person, virtually, for 3 years to draft not the complete Forest Act, but the general part of a Forest Act. And the good news here is that we have been working for over almost 2 years now, and we have already drafted a substantial part of what we are supposed to draft. We are also beginning the consultation process with different biomes. We have done consultations in Asia. We will be doing consultation in the Amazon River Basin in January, at the end of January, with the OTCA, in English, ACTO, the Amazonian Cooperation Treaty Secretariat. It's in Brasilia. And then we intend to do it in the Congo Basin and in another, in this case for temperate forests, probably in Norway. So that's what we have. It's a group of experts, a group of scientists. We are drafting the text, and now that we have a good rough draft, we are beginning the consultation to get the criticism, the inputs from other experts, from governments, from civil society. A couple of final points. As opposed to a treaty or a convention, this is not a negotiated document, which is great. We sit together and we have only one commitment, which is to put in the text what we think is the very best. How would this work? We call it the shopping cart approach. We are going to have it online with commentaries and giving different options. So imagine you are a member of parliament, or you are in the Ministry of Forests or the Environment, you are drafting your new Forest Act. So you go with your shopping cart and you say, I like that. I just take it. I don't like this. This is not applicable to my country. Drop it. And those other provisions I like, but not so much. At least I have a basis. I would change that. So, no imposition, just a good text that makes sense from a legal and scientific, but also from an economic, social perspective as well. So, in a nutshell, that's what MoFAI is. You are going to hear from the other colleagues, and especially the colleagues that are members of the drafting committee. There are several of them here, not all of them, and we are expanding the number of institutions that are partners. Two ones that are not here in the logos, the Biodiversity Convention soon will join. Formally, the Desertification Convention has already joined, but the logo is not here. And the final one, I mean, at least in this stage, is Interpol, because we have a whole chapter on crimes against the environment. We cannot protect forests just with talk. We have to have the whole regulatory circle in the Model Forest Act. So we begin with a preamble, with the scope, then the objectives, the principles, the instruments, the institutions, and compliance and enforcement. It's the whole circle in a single document. And this will allow countries, but not just national governments, subnational governments, to have a package and see, look, this is not just the skeleton, the basic skeleton, but it's also the substance of what is absolutely updated, sometimes cutting edge, that we include there. But we're not forcing anybody to take. You like it, you take it. You don't take it. But what we think is relevant is there. We, as a community of experts. Perhaps one last word. When we, with the partners, and the Secretariat is with the Asian Development Bank, we started looking for legal experts in forests. We couldn't find them. I've been in this for 40 years. But because we never worked specifically on forest, we thought that we would have 1 million legal experts. We don't. We have hundreds or thousands of experts on climate change. Such a recent topic. Forest has been with us, forest legislation, for at least 5 centuries, if we don't count the Hammurabi Code and other pieces of ancient legislation. Forests are there too. But in climate change, thousands of experts. On CITES, so endangered species, hundreds of legal experts. Pollution, air, water, you name it, hundreds of experts. Water, hundreds of experts. Pesticides, hundreds of experts, but very few legal experts on forests. And I think this is very telling. It does mean that we need to focus and do work, not just in drafting a good text, but also building a community of law expertise on forests. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief Justice Benjamin. Indeed, this will be a very valuable knowledge resource for countries that are really looking for the expertise. So next, I'd like to invite Tristan Tyrell. He's the Program Management Officer of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So one of our, I guess, latest partners that have joined. So please. You could speak from there as well. So, Ronaldo, he has another meeting, so we're giving him the floor. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies that I do have to rush off, but appreciate it. Yes, first of all, thank you very much to the organizers of this event, and of course to the champions of the Model Forest Act initiative. So within the Convention on Biological Diversity, in fact, I'm going to echo a lot of what Andrea said on behalf of UNCCD. It's astounding, frankly, that forests have had such little legal recognition in that sort of sense, given how predominant they are when a lot of people think of nature, how often they focus on forests, on trees as being in particular that sort of emblem of what is nature protection, and of course our link to it. But just the fact that we have seen, in particular when it comes to this convention, the focus has been very much on forests in that link between what is the role of nature in helping to support achieving the objectives of the UNFCCC. But the interpretation of what that means in terms of action has led to some less than optimum consequences. When it comes to either looking at forest degradation and deforestation as being one of the causes of climate change, one of the sources of emissions, but then also when it comes to reforestation and that sort of restoration, what sort of species are being planted, where are they being planted, and what's the viability of some of those. When it comes to the CBD, yes, nature, biodiversity, everyone agrees it's very important, but it's always been one of the Sorry, is that any better?
It's good.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what that means. He keeps telling me to do that, but I don't know what that means. To hold it like that. So I'll hold it like that. Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Within the CBD, it's very much been nature is a nice to have. That linking to the social and economic importance of biodiversity has often meant that NBSAPs, our National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, have been developed and revised, but then again, ultimately then sort of put aside in favor of more economic sectoral development policies. And it's that need to link right across society as a whole, recognizing that the biodiversity related policies link very much through to other policies, whether it's related to climate change, to food and agriculture, to health, to economic development, whatever the case may be. And ultimately, we need legal frameworks, adequate, appropriate legal frameworks that link through to that. And the enforcement and compliance element is essential within that, because frankly, very often environmental laws in terms of going through the judicial systems lead to fairly underwhelming consequences for those who are doing them, which doesn't necessarily provide the right incentives for those who need to do the right thing to actually do them. And we are hearing from the private sector and from others that there is this request for governments to step forward with regulatory frameworks, with the appropriate legal frameworks, in order to make sure that it's a level playing field for everyone to be doing the same, if not better, and that minimum standard of what is needed is met. My final point is just in terms of the participation. Forests are obviously very important for people across society as a whole, but from different perspectives and different reasons. And for indigenous peoples and local communities have a very different view on the importance of forests compared to, say, the private sector or for others, or for people who live in urban areas further downstream, what have you. And so that need for consultation and active participation in this process, whether it's through the model framework, forest initiative, or indeed when governments themselves are taking this forward, that there is this recognition that there are different rights and relationships with forests that need to be taken into account. Thank you very much.
So next I'd like to introduce Ronaldo Sembring. He's the Executive Director of the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. And we had the pleasure of meeting with Ronaldo, and he did some drafting of the Model Forest Act. Go ahead,
Ronaldo. Thank you, Christina. I need a podium because I have some data in my laptop. Let me introduce myself again. My name is Ronaldo Sembring from Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. My role here to explain more about the Indonesian's context and how is the international legal framework influence for Indonesia, and the ways forward that we can utilize by the MoFAI that already explains by Justice Antonio. The Honorable Justice, distinguished speaker, and all of the participants, let me start our presentation here by introduce you little bit the importance of Indonesian ecosystem to our Earth. The first, we already know that Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world with the 60% of the total land area, or 120 million hectares designated as the forest area. We have a third largest tropical forest country after Brazil and the Congo. And in Indonesia, indigenous people and the local community have the important role in the forest management. It's running by granting legal access and rights through the social forestry program and other forest entitlements, fostering equitable and sustainable of forests and fostering equitable and sustainable use of the forest resources. How is the international legal framework influenced in Indonesia? At least the four items of the legal framework influence Indonesia. The first is the UNFCCC legal framework. Under the UNFCCC, we have like a Kyoto Protocol, including the Paris agreements. We already have the REDD programs. Under the REDD program, we have a lot of program more focused to resolve the tenures issue through development of the social safeguards mechanism and effort to accelerate the gazettement of the forest boundaries. And the second one, the law enforcement against the forestry crime. And the third one, the clearer spatial planning related to the forest in terms of the compliance with our national appropriate mitigation actions. The second one, biodiversity legal framework, CITES, CBD, including the Nagoya Protocol and the implementing of framework is influenced Indonesia legal framework. And the third one, the right to access and environmental rule of the law regime under the Rio Declaration. I can name Principle 10, Principle 13, Principle 15, and other principles under the Declaration, such as responsibility, enactment of the effective environmental legislation, EIA, as the national instrument already influenced Indonesia legal framework. And also, IUCN for the red list, for the guidance for the endangered species is also guidance for Indonesia legal system. The distinguished speaker and the participant, in Indonesia context, at least we have the 6 typologies of the forestry crime. The first is the forest fire. The second one, illegal logging, illegal mining, poaching and illegal wildlife trade, pollution and environmental damage. The new one issue, we also have a problem about the SLAPs or environmental human rights defender or criminalization towards community around and in forest area. I believe the policy legal reform is playing pivotal role in saving forests. We already have forest policy and regulations such as our Forestry Act, Forestry Crime Act regulation, regulation on mangrove and peatland restoration, and regulation on the social forestry. At least we have the three items is important in context of the Indonesia forest law. The first is the protecting the forest and the biodiversity. The second one, provide the rights and the tenure security, is quite important because there is no forest area without the community in Indonesia. If you come to the some of the forest conservation area, even the production area, community who live exists before the company or before the concessions. We already have the social forestry, and we already have the regulations on that. In our social forestry program, we already reach approximately 7 million hectares out of 12.7 million hectares targeted. And we also have the important things on the law enforcement. Particularly now in Indonesia, law enforcement is not only corrective actions, it's not only how to giving the sanction, but also how to restore the environment. So on that, we utilize the balancing on the administrative sanctions, criminal sanction, and also by the civil litigations. The distinguished speaker and all of the participants. Court in Indonesia playing a pivotal role as well. Through 18 forestry lawsuits related to the forest fire and illegal logging, the court has already mandated environmental restoration with costs amounting $100 billion, which cover more than 20,000 hectare forest area since 2015 until this year. Restoration measures are currently taken with the three companies' concessions. Moreover, our work, ICEL and other CSO, we assisted the governments on the compliance review of the palm oil concession or the permit review. Almost 90,000 hectares of the land and forest area were safe. What are the challenges on the forest protection in Indonesia? The challenges now is not only about the forest sector as well, but the nexus, forestry and energy. Now Indonesia, one of the priority for the new administrative government is energy and the food security. So it consists all of the some challenges. The first, deforestation to fulfill energy transition and energy security from the nickel, biomass, and biofuel. And some of data show that we need at least 9 until 10 million hectares of the new palm oil land will be needed for implements of the biofuel. So it will make some of the loss of forest cover. And also, the data now, analysis show that in the last 20 years, cumulative almost 200,000 hectares of the forest and land have been cleared due to the nickel mitigation. So, what happened in our NDC? Our NDC is still explained not a linkage in the mitigation aspect on the forest sector and the another related sector like the energy, waste. But it's very important to see the nexus about among all of the sectors. Another program that will be the challenges for the Indonesia is the food estate. The food estate now in the central Kalimantan has caused at least 3,000 hectares of the deforestations. And the other challenges for the community is difficulties accelerating forest and land tenure security for the IPLC. Even though we already working hard to propose a lot of administrative data to secure the rights of the community to getting the access under the forest under the social forestry program, but some of the bureaucratic aspect is still happen here, and we are need to some of the tools to speed up all of the process. And the last one, the challenges that happen in Indonesia is the corruptions and the lack of the good governance. See, you can imagine until the nouns, I think more than 1 decade, we already have 27 cases of the forestry related corruptions now in Indonesia. Based on the study to 2003 until the 2014, 77% of the timber production reports were not recorded in our Ministry of Environment and the Forestry. So corruptions is also the problem exists in Indonesia now. So I grateful, and I was very happy when invited by the Justice Antonio and the MoFAI team to giving some of our idea and inputs from the Indonesia context during the consignerings, during the discussion in Indonesia when the MoFAI team was come to Indonesia. In my opinion, my honest opinion, MoFAI is the brilliant idea to giving the new model for the forest act. This is important. In my perspective, MoFAI can provide a guidance to evaluate a gap from the existing forestry act, particularly in Indonesia. Now Indonesia Parliament have an agenda to revise the forestry act, and MoFAI can be guidance. We put the MoFAI standard because I know that MoFAI have a brilliant standard, brilliant principles, so we can put as the baseline and the high standard to evaluate the forestry act in Indonesia. The second one, MoFAI provide the important principles to be implemented in the national legislation and the court decision. For example, I see non-regression principle there, zero loss forest principles, and duty care to forest. I think this some of for example of the principle and instrument or the standards as important for as a guidance to revise, to reform our policy, our regulation, and also can be information and a guidance for the justice or the judge in Indonesia particularly to giving good decisions. The last one, provide important insight on the latest development of the forestry and the climate science to be implemented in the national legislation by the government and promoted by the CSO. I'm stopped here. I'm very happy to speaking here, and I hope MoFAI can giving a lot of solution, particularly Indonesia. I know it's like too ambitious for myself, but I believe MoFAI can giving MoFAI ada new hope and can giving some of the breakthrough and giving the policy legal reform, particularly Indonesia. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you, Ronaldo. It's such a privilege partnering with ICEL, and seriously, you're one of our biggest MoFAI advocates, so many thanks. So I'd like to invite Gustavo Olanes Ortega. He's the president of the Mexican Center for Environmental Law to the stage, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, Cristina. Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you, Antonio, for inviting me today, and to the Asian Development Bank and all the sponsors of this event. I would like to start my my words by giving like a very big picture of what we have at the national level in Mexico and at the international level when we talk about forest. So, for example, at the international level, we all know we have the forest principles, no? That came from Rio 1992. At the national level, for example, in Mexico, we have the forest law, we have a forest policy, we have a national forest program, no? So we have a whole package of laws, regulations, and policies that are in place, no? So what's the problem? What's around this? The first thing I would like to say is that there's no effective enforcement and compliance of these regulations and these policies, no? And I am very disappointed because we've been talking about this for 30 years, no? This is not a matter of today. We've been talking about this since 1992, 1993, or even before that, no? So why this is happening, and I think there's a lot of similarity with the previous speaker of what is happening in Mexico. for example, the institutions are not as, the forest institutions are not as strong as they should be. That's one thing. The other is that they don't have the financial resources that they should have. No? The budget is very low. No? For example, the National Forest Commission in Mexico has very little money, or the Office of the Attorney General for Environmental Protection that has to go after those who are violating the law. They don't have the sufficient staff, they don't have the sufficient resources, financial resources to go after those who do not comply with the forest law. We also have a problem with all the economic interests that are fighting against the conservation and protection of forests, but we also have organized crime, which in the case of Mexico has been causing a lot of deforestation. Nobody goes after them, and they are selling the wood nationally and internationally because there's a whole regime that is making a huge business. But also we have had lack of political will, no? Because this should be a priority for all our countries, and it is not today, no? So I think we need to work on this matter. And also we need to assure that the institutions that are in charge of forest protection and conservation had a good coordination, had a good communication, have a good collaboration. And I think it is very important, Antonio, that the judicial power has to take a much bigger role, no? In order to have decisions, resolutions, in order for the forest to be better protected. And also to mention that there's a lot of impunity, no, happening out there. No, a lot of people commit administrative faults. They commit forest crimes, and nobody goes after them. No, so I believe that also the forest laws have to be fully updated, and that's why this Model Forest Act initiative has a important role to play today, and I congratulate you, Antonio, and all the team for this that you have been done. So, in order for the law to be able to serve effectively in the protection and conservation of forests, and to protect at the same time the people who protect the forest, and I am referring to environmental defenders and local population, it is necessary to build constructive and inclusive bridges between these two visions. To build these bridges and ensure that they are strong, they must be based, among other things, on key elements such as the access rights to environmental information, public participation in the decision-making process, and access to justice, as it is set out in the Escazú Agreement for the Americas. Also, proper conditions need to be established in order for environmental defenders to be able to undertake their work without any intimidation, without any aggression. In the case of Mexico, 20 environmental defenders were killed last year in 2023. Also to say that Escazú is a regional agreement in the Americas, and that places a continuous emphasis on the effective exercise rights using understandable and reliable information, also participation in a timely, culturally, and appropriate manner. Environmental public information needs to be comprehensive to everybody. Access rights facilitate the exercise of other rights, such as the equitable distribution of benefits, as well as the prevention and resolution of social and environmental conflicts. With effective access to information in a timely and understandable way for the communities, and the opportunity to participate in an effective, culturally appropriate and timely manner, and equitable distribution of benefits and sustainable use of forests are promoted. It also promotes effective and equitable governance that reduces the need for access to justice and curbs the terrible insecurity and risk faced by people and communities in this case in the region of the Americas. So I would like to close by saying that I believe, and we do believe a lot in the region, that ESCASU, the ESCASU agreement, can be an important tool for the role of national and international law protecting forests. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Gustavo. So many thanks to our panel 1 speakers. So we'll now move to panel 2, and many thanks, Gustavo, for bringing up the important issue of effective implementation and enforcement. So now we will transition to panel 2 and bring to the stage the justices that will participate. So Justice Mala, I'll hand the floor back to you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. We'll now move to our panel 2 on the role of the judiciary in the implementation and enforcement of forest laws. So it is a great pleasure to have with us distinguished judges and justices from high courts from 5 different countries to join us here on this panel. I will introduce them all just very briefly and then turn it over to them to make some brief opening statements. And then Christina and I will moderate a panel discussion. So we have with us Justice Luc Lavrissen, President of the Constitutional Court of Belgium, Justice Sapana Mala from the Supreme Court of Nepal, Judge Elisa Samuel, who's the Director General of the Center for Judicial and Legal Training of Mozambique, Justice Prakash Srivastava, the Chairperson of the National Green Tribunal of India, and Justice Bambang Mulyono, Head of the Research, Development, Education, and Training Agency for Law and Judiciary from the Supreme Court of Indonesia. So I'll turn the time over to all of them to give some brief opening statements on the role of the judiciary in implementing and enforcing forest laws. And I suppose we can go in this order, if you would, Justice Lavrissen.
I would like to say something about the European Union and forest law. If we look to the European Union as such, there is no comprehensive forest law at the level of the European Union. But we have some pieces of legislation which are very important. In the first place, the Habitats Directive is a very important piece, and that legislation is applicable to those forests which are Natura 2000 habitats. That's around 20% of our forest, and this legislation provides for strong protection, and this legislation is also interpreted in a tough way, let's say, by the Court of Justice of the European Union, and by that also following up to that by the national judges. Second part is relatively new, is the new nature restoration law, and that law has as an objective to bring the nature, in the protected nature, in a good shape again, because in practice 81% of our nature is not in a good shape. So in that legislation there are restoration objective, and member states must come up with plans to bring the protected nature in a good shape. Furthermore, we have also some guidelines about the protection of forests against fires. There's an important new legislation or revised legislation, which is the land use and land use change and forestry regulations, which has as an objective to increase the coverage of forest and woodland, so that in the end 310 million tons carbon dioxide could be stored additionally in that forest. We have a new directive on environmental crime, which is important because it's not only providing that also crime against forests must be tackled, is increasing also the level of sanctions, but also provide for coordination, training, etc. Coordination of the enforcement chains, training, and so on. So, but that is brand new legislation adopted this year. So member states have still 2 years to implement it. And then the last piece of importance is the deforestation regulation, which try to provides that on the European market no more products may be placed that cause deforestation within the European Union and outside the European Union. This legislation should be enforced end of this year, but meanwhile the European Commission, and it has already been accepted by the Council, so the Member States and the European Parliament will postpone the coming into entrance of this regulation with 1 year. And this week, Wednesday, the European Parliament has voted on that proposal, but has added amendments to that proposal, amendments which are presented as trying to get rid of some red tape, so weakening the regulation in practice. And I think I've never seen such a debate in the European Parliament. The European Parliament was really split into two parties, and the conservative fraction has joined with the ultra-right fraction, and they have won. So now we have to see if these amendments will really go through, yes or no. So this is important regulations, European regulation we have, but it's not comprehensive. So forest law, most of the member states have their forest codes, but there is a huge difference. Some of them are very old, some of them have been renewed or updated and so on. And as the judiciary comes at stake, almost all types of judges, be it administrative judges, if one has permit discussions, civil judges when there is or damages and compensations, criminal judges when there is illegal lodging. So nearly every type of judge will have to deal in one or another manner with those domestic forest laws. So that as an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Justice Mala, please.
First of all, I would like to congratulate Chief Justice Antonio for your leadership to initiate this model forest law drafting process, and also would like to extend Asia Bank for extending all the support to make it happen. Today I'm going to focus on Nepal, and even before going to what approach court has been taking, I want to talk about first what strength the prevailing law has and what gaps we have found which can be some indicator for model law reform process, model law drafting process. I come from Nepal, where from my childhood, we were taught that the green forest is the asset, the prosperity of the country. And we have a law which is one of the oldest law, and it was enacted even many of us were born. But with the court interpretation and amendments from the government, they are trying to make it contemporary, and some benchmark it has created. One I must mention about comprehensive forest categorization, that also institutionalizing community forestry within the categorization, which has empowered the local community, local users group to protect and manage and also get benefit to the community. So this is one of the benchmark through the new amendment taken place, but it has not only empowered the users group, but in fact within the regulation it has a provision to ensure 33% women and either president or secretary woman or vice chair or treasurer woman. As a result, in users group there are 50% women, and then now we can see the socio-economic and political transformation of women in leadership position within the community, not only within the community forestry group but within the federation of community forestry group. As a result, now the forest area has been increasing, and now it has gone up to 45.3%, and we are still expecting spontaneous increment of the forest. Second, I would also like to mention the Act recognizing carbon mitigation and environmental services, encouraging sustainable practices and providing grants to provide private forest owners who support the conservation efforts. As a result, we already have agreement with World Bank to trade 9 million metric ton carbon trade by 2025, and 2.2 million metric ton carbon has already been trade off. But again, to make sure the quality carbon is trade off, and to ensure private party also engage in the process and get benefit of sharing on fair and equity basis. A regulation is being drafted, and I'm happy that the person who is taking lead in redrafting the regulation is Mr. Dahal is with us, and who will make sure that benefit directly goes to the community on the fair and equity basis. But at the same time, I must mention here that there are lots of gaps within the law. One is limited autonomy to the community forestry group, and restricted authorities has been discouraging this community users group. On top of that, with the federalization of the country, there are 3 layers of government and excessive tax by each level of government, as well as the weak governance is seen as a corruption. So we have a lot of challenge on how to managing those aspects. Is one area where I think we would expect a visionary model forest legislation. And at the same time, the law has not been able to create sustainable forest management and livelihood, and mechanism to institutionalize governance. I think that is where the focus has to be made. And then on top of that, we also see ambiguity in land acquisition and compensation. Authority is granted for forest to forest officials, but the Act lacks a specific monitoring mechanism to ensure accountability, risking ineffective implementation and corruption. and there's overlapping authorities among the government authorities, and over militarization of armed forces within the forest area is another area where because of that people have a limited access, and especially those communities who are dependent on forest, indigenous community, and also the community, the people who live in the buffer zone, who have a responsibility to protect, take duty to care the forest, but they have no access to the forest resources. So those are some of the challenges. And on top of that, what I have seen also, over criminalization of poverty is another issue which I mentioned at the moment in my opening remarks as some of the gaps, and then in second session I will be more talking about the approach court is taking in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Mala. Next for your opening statement, Judge Samuel. You're welcome to stay there or go up to the podium, either way.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Yes? Okay, first of all, I would like also to say thank you to the Global Judicial Institute on Environment. Antonio is not here to invite us to be here and make part of this great and a very important event, and also Global Forest Goals Initiative. I'm from Mozambique. I am a judge, but currently sitting at the Judicial Training Institute of my country. I've been acting as a director for 7 years. One of the things that we've been talking about it since this morning is about how the role of judiciary can be enforced in terms of all the climate change and also forest laws. We've been trained judges for so long about environmental laws, and now with climate change laws. And indeed, in the panel before, the President Gustavo was talking about lack of political will, corruption. These are also the elements that you will find in my country. But Mozambique have last year improved in terms of forest law. We as a country, we have a comprehensive framework for forest resources management, including measures aimed to improve resilience on climate change. The new law highlights sustainable use, conservation, local community involvement, scientific research, and good governance principles. While these provisions are very good in improvement, we still, of course, have some potential gaps that could limit the law effectiveness and also the role of judges, of courts. In terms of adequacy, the law, in terms of adequacy, Article 4 of this new law talks about sustainability and resilience, scientific research on other provision, community involvement, which for me, I think it's very important to have local community participating on forest management, ensuring inclusiveness, because in Africa, normally we would ask, so now that you say that we cannot use the forest, the resource within the forest, what we're going to eat? Because one of the development goals is end and reduce the poverty. But including them, it's very important so that they can also participate in alternative ways of living. So this is was very reinforced in this new law. Prevention and mitigation also it's one of the new provision. We tackles also decision making in terms of conservation first approach when uncertainties arise. As I mentioned, we still have gaps in. We can see some gaps. My colleagues from Nepal, she talked about monitoring and enforcement. This is one of the gaps that we can appoint is this new law. While the law, of course, establishes these mechanisms, but for monitoring deforestation and forest degradation, we see that there are lack of clear detail of enforcement capacity or penalties for non-compliance that will hinder the role of courts. And if you think about my country, you will think that this maybe we lack a little bit of sovereignty to do it, to improve in terms of monitoring and climate change tackle. Because Mozambique, now that I'm speaking, we have signed 29 contracts on fossil fuel with 29 mega projects on oil and gas and extractive industry. Those contracts come also with heavy clauses in terms of improve your national legislation. This is something that I think we have to talk about it. It's good to hear that I hear banks, investors that normally they will also be working with these mega projects. But I think it's a limitation of sovereignty. It's a limitation of ways to enforce the forest law and also climate change tackle. It's also one of another gaps is incentives of private sector, as also Tom, I think you mentioned before. And what I like most in the MoFAI principle is the principle of interpretation. This is new. I think this is going to help courts and judges to improve in terms of implementation. So I will stop here and then I will come back with another questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judge Samuel. Next for your opening statement, I turn to Honorable Justice Prakash Srivastava from the National Green Tribunal of India.
No problem. Okay. Very good afternoon to all of you, and thanks to the organizers of this good and in-depth deliberation, and also to Justice Benjamin, who normally takes leads in such issues. I say both privilege as well as responsibility to take part in such in-depth deliberation on the issue of protection of the forests. For India, it's an important issue, as is for the other countries. We contribute for about 2% of the world forest, and with a GDP of around 7%, we have the responsibility of balancing growth with protecting the environment. And judiciary plays a very important role in this. It's not only decides cases, it interprets law, and it takes proactive measures for the protection of the forest and environment. But a judiciary can play a role if there is a firm legislative framework existing in the country. So far as India is concerned, we have in fact such a framework existing. Our constitution itself is the mother of all the enactments, It contains the fundamental right under Article 21, right to life. And by court's interpretation, right to clean environment, that's taken to be a fundamental right of the citizens. Now it has the directive principles of the state policy, that's Article 48A has been incorporated therein. That's by way of 42nd Amendment in the Constitution in 1976, which imposes the responsibility upon the state to preserve the environment, protect the forests. Then we have the fundamental duties which have been incorporated under Article 51AG, whereas every citizen has the duty to preserve, improve, protect forest and environment. So with this mother enactment of the Constitution, we have the laws which have been enacted by the parliaments. We have the Forest Act 1927. We have the Forest Conservation Act, wherein the regime has been provided to conserve the forest. Then we have Environmental Protection Act, which empowers the government to issue directions for the protection of the environment, which are these directions issued under the Act have the statutory force. Then we have Biodiversity Act, we have Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Then we have National Forest Policy, National Environment Policy. So there is a legal framework which is existing. Now the question comes up about gaps. Yes, the gaps are noticed by the courts, because when an in-depth analysis of an enactment is done, the courts come to know about the gaps. And in that process, there is an attempt to fill the gaps either by issuing directions or issuing guidelines, or it's pointing out, highlighting it to the government. So this is how the entire framework works. Now, after the Stockholm Declaration in 1972, India became the third country in the world to set up a specialized tribunal to deal with the environmental law. It was the first developing country, third country overall. So in 2010, the National Green Tribunal Act was enacted by the Parliament, and the National Green Tribunal is exclusively to deal with the environmental issues that are set up. Now, it has the regional benches covering the entire country, having one expert from the field of environment and one judge. So that's the minimum quorum, is one judge, one expert. They'll sit together and they'll go deep in the environmental issues. And in course of time, in so many years, a large number of cases relating to environment have been dealt with by the court. Then we have the apex court, that's the Supreme Court of India. It also takes up the environmental issues. And in fact, I'll give you with an example, I'll just show how the courts can play proactive roles in protecting the environment. One case that was filed in 1995 in the Supreme Court, that was T.N. Godavaran Thirupad versus Union of India. That was relating to the illegal felling of trees in Nilgiri area. The court could have decided it, finished the matter, but no. The Supreme Court kept it pending. It made it a lead matter. It's still pending. And one by one, the issues are being taken up in that. Either the applications are filed through the applications, the litigants coming up. In that matter, the court then defined forest. What is forest? Says you take the dictionary meaning of it, gave a wide definition of forest. Then, as the matter developed, the issues came up. The court, in that matter, says that if any non-forest activity is to take place in the forest area, then you must have the prior approval of the competent authority. You can't just go there and change the use of the forest, use it, destroy the forest. So that's the restriction which was put. Then it went further. In between 1997 and 2000, it started monitoring the project clearances, whether the projects, they should not affect the forest. It formed a committee, the Supreme Court formed a committee to review the encroachments which were there in the forest to prevent the forest degradation, to ensure that the new projects, they don't come up affecting the forest areas. Then it says that no, without permission, without clearance from the Ministry of Forest, you should not take up such activities in the forest areas. Then it went ahead. The matter was kept pending. It went ahead. Then 2002, a green bench was formed in the court. A green bench exclusive to hear the matter relating to the forest. Then it formed because by that time, so many orders were passed. The issue of monitoring of the directions came up. So it formed a central empowered committee. So that's the committee which looked into the regulation part of it, ensuring that the orders which are passed by the courts are complied with, or examining the intricate issue relating to the forest conservation. Then in 2000, the court said no mining in the forest area and no diversion of the forest for that purposes. Then came 2006, there was a Forest Right Act which was enacted. So the issue of protection of the rights of the tribals, those who are dependent upon the forest, because it's a kind of ecology which work. They are dependent upon the forest and they protect the forest also. So the court came up, Supreme Court says, yes, you protect the rights of those persons who are dependent upon the forest. Then the court took up the issue of the encroachment, removal of encroachments from the forest area. Then after 2011 now, it's issuing direction to strengthen the regime of forest protection. So this is how, what I want to say, this is, take this example of one case. The Supreme Court of India has, in one case, keeping it pending, regulating it, issuing directions from time to time. Whenever the gaps came to the notice of the court tried to fill it up. So by taking the proactive role, the Supreme Court has in fact made the regime of the implementation of forest laws and prevention of the forest degradation an effective regime. So this is how the courts can play a very effective role, and I wish and I urge everybody to recognize this power of the judiciary to take a lead, play effective role, and preserve and prevent the forest and stop forest degradation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Justice Srivastava. And finally, for these opening statements, let me turn to Judge Bambang from Indonesia.
Good afternoon. I would like to say thank you to Justice Benjamin and also from ADP that invited me to join with this session for SCOP 29. And as the head of the Judicial Training Center, I also want to say thank you because we have opportunity to serve the expertise to finishing the concept of the draft of Model Forest Act. So I will explain about the role of judiciary on saving forest related with Model Forest Act initiative. On forestry issue, the judiciary holds several important roles in protecting the forest. Given the complexity of forestry issues in Indonesia, the court is not only expected to implement the forestry law, the court is also expected to implement the important principles, understand the science, and be able to explore the value of justice, especially in environmental issues. Court decision also influence the policy making, allowing court to become an important avenue for reform. And however, the Model Forest Act is not legally binding yet, but the Model Forest Act is important material to deliver to judges in Indonesia. Based on monitoring and evaluation in Supreme Court, we identify several ways to how the court in Indonesia contributes on advancing the measures of saving the forest, such as one enforcement and forestry and environmental law, realizing a strong judiciary system that able to respond violation. For example, illegal logging, illegal and land conservation. Illegal land conversion, forest fire. So through imposing sanction that able to give the deterrent effect to the perpetrator and appropriate remedies granted for environmental restoration and impacted communities. Second, in ensuring forest protection and ecosystem integrity. In cases against administrative decision related to forest use and or forest conservation, the court is expected to provide protection upon the forest and ecosystem integrity through its interpretation of forestry laws and principles. Human rights are also an aspect that often arises in discussion of affected communities and becomes a source of environmental disputes related to human rights. That is ensuring justice for indigenous people and local communities amid a conflict between the states, large companies, and indigenous people over forest ownership and rights. Enforcement against corruption in forestry sector. Corruption has become one of the factors of forest destruction in Indonesia. The judiciary's commitment to resolve this issue that can be traced through several cases related to corruption is another factor of why judiciary hold an important role on saving the forest. So what is the effort of Indonesia Supreme Court on advancing the role of judiciary? The first is environmental judges certification. Supreme Court of Indonesia ensures judges could handle the complex environmental and forestry issues through this system. Topics covered in the certification program include legal and technical aspects, scientific evidence, and modus operandi on forest fire and illegal logging cases. Since 2012 until now, there have been 1,579 environmental certified judges in Indonesia. Second is Supreme Court Regulation Number 1, 2023 on environmental cases handling guidelines. This is important regulation. Supreme Court of Indonesia provides guidelines to handle environmental cases, including forestry cases. This guideline provides several guidance for judges, such as on handling environmental cases, judges shall adopt principle from law number 2009 on environmental protection and management. Several important principles including precautionary principle, polluter pays principle, and good governance, and the other sustainable development principle developing in the international environmental law. Guidance on examining types of scientific evidence on handling cases such as expert testimony in court, written expert statement, satellite imagery, environmental forestry and wildlife forensic data, laboratory test result, and other types of evidence. So this is must be judges must be know. Although this is not knowledge about law. Ensuring restoration-oriented law enforcement through obligation to incorporate restoration plan and lawsuit requesting restoration costs. Provision to accelerate environmental court decision, execution, and restoration. Number 3 is challenges for the court in addressing forest law. Challenge judges to understand scientific evidence, forestry cases, especially those related to illegal logging, forest and land fires, and land clearing, rely on technical and scientific evidence such as remote sensing, satellite image, and GIS data, which may be unfamiliar for the judges or for the court. Limited forestry expert, mainly due to the broad typology and variation in forestry law violation cases. In the Indonesian context, there are obstacles to executing judgment in environmental cases, especially forest and land fire cases. In addition, none of the compensation paid by defendant has been used to restore the impact of forest and land fires. And the complexity of forestry cases, forestry policies that continuously develop it, overlapping claims in forest area and other technical aspects about forest poses challenges in handling forestry crimes. Finally, I hope that the Model Forest Act will strengthen the court in making court decisions that support forest conservation, biodiversity, and environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Bambang. And thank you to all of you for those opening statements. This has really been a great introduction to these concepts of all of the various aspects of the role of the judiciary in the implementation and enforcement of forest laws. And thank you to Judge Bambang, who hosted the Model Forest Act Initiative Drafting Committee just a few months ago in Indonesia for one of our meetings. We heard a lot of interesting concepts, maybe some of the more positive aspects in discussing certification for judges in environmental law as a possible solution for trying to manage these questions, and the work of the National Green Tribunal in India, as well as the challenges moving forward. As Judge Samuel mentioned, the conflicts between these, between forest laws and then the existing agreements that Mozambique and other countries may have that impose restrictions and clauses on how the countries can implement their forest laws. And as Justice Mala mentioned, there's conflict among different levels of government and how to manage the forests. And there are pushes for regressions in environmental laws in Europe and in other places around the world, as Justice Levrieson mentioned. So now with the rest of the time that we have with our distinguished panel with the justices, we want to switch to some questions so that we can have a little bit of dialogue among all of you. Okay. So the first question that I have for you to then just take a moment or two to consider is, to what extent do you think current forest laws are adequate to address climate change? This is one sort of particular challenge while we're here at the Climate Change COP. Are forest laws able to address climate change? And if not, what gaps do you think there are specifically in dealing with that, either from climate mitigation or climate adaptation? And we can go ahead and go in the same order, I think. Yeah.
So as I mentioned, forest law in Europe is mostly domestic, with legislation from different times. Most of those forest legislations are not made in the light of climate change, but even the quality of the legislation might be different. I think a good point to start with is to apply the legislation. So to combat, to protect the forests and the woodland we have, so to combat illegal logging, to combat human-induced forest fires, to combat unsustainable use of forests, to have an economic role to play, and to apply nature protection law where it's applicable. So my judges are just one chain in the enforcement chain. So it starts with inspection, then we have police, we have prosecution, and then the judges come. So to them to apply the law, to provide effective sanctions within the framework the law is providing. But maybe with some interpretation, one can, let's say, adapt forest law to climate circumstances. For example, if judges have to decide when there is illegal deforestation, how to compensate and to restore that harm, I think judges should be aware that it's not just a question of the area, because young forests will capture much less carbon than etc. So one should take into consideration that fact that it's not just a question of size, but also a question of quantum of carbon. So that can lead to decisions on compensations which are more important. Maybe we can also think about in different legal systems we have the possibility to provide for alternative sanctions apart from the classical fines, prison, etc. And I'm thinking about something we have in our country for juvenile, problematic juvenile, who are under the supervision of the juvenile judge. They must do a sort of community service. And one of the successful projects is learning them working in sustainable forest management. So maybe we should apply also this type of sanctions, this type of alternative sanctions, not only for the juvenile, but also for those or elder than that. So that might be some ideas.
What court has been doing? Yes, I mean, from Nepal's experience, we have been able to make government accountable in its non-action, its wrong action, but also we have been able to bridge the vacuum of law, because after the court order, environmental law is in place, and at the same time, a climate justice chapter within the environmental law has been inserted after the court order. Now, the question is how to law matters, but having law is not enough. How to put law into a place? So if we look at our experience in Nepal, we have been able to uphold principle of intergenerational equity, stressing the importance of preserving forest for further future generation. In some of the case, court has used EIA as a tool to make a government accountable or put the governance. For example, in the Nizgard airport construction case, the Supreme Court constitutional bench even asked the government to look for the alternate to mitigate the harm. So different approaches are taken by the court, but even like in taking some approaches, it depends on the nature of the case, because one answer may not fit to different context. So for example, when the government wanted to construct the road from the national park, that time court says no, you cannot construct the road. So they took a stand, a prohibitory approach, complete prohibitory approach, and in some nature of the cases it has been taking precautionary measure and mitigation approach. In some of the judgment, court has already recognized not only right to nature but right of nature, and maintaining the dignity of nature, and also upholding the principle of dubio pro natura. And then the court has also taken an approach of forest and for forest and wildlife protection. Not only forest and wildlife protection is not only seen as a matter of preserving ecosystem, but also of safeguarding fundamental human rights, recognizing human beings the major factor of environmental harm and also the sufferer of those harms. Nepal judiciary has also recognized disproportionate effect on certain caste, certain communities, certain sex, and called for equitable distribution of environmental harm and benefits. And now court has also been able to communicate, because court has always been seen as being against the development. In some of the cases we are trying, and it's still very hard to communicate that court is not against the development, but court is standing for ecologically sustained development. So that is where we are confronting. We are also confronting with some other challenges, like lack of conceptual understanding between what is conservation, what is protection. As a result, we have not been able to use and maximize benefit from the forest and wildlife. There is also human and animal conflict. So balancing is quite challenging. So and also how to, because other hand, in Nepal, like what we have experienced, the number of wildlife are increasing. So how to make sure that there is ecological balance, and bringing that conceptual understanding again is a challenge. And then finally I would like to say, yes, law matters, but court has been quite actively engaged, especially in PIL cases that has been coming to the court. But with the law, I think it's very important that there is a institutional mechanism, there is resources allocated, And as my friend Elisa mentioned, that empowering the right holder, empowering the duty holder is critical, especially to make them understand on different approaches to protect the forest and to protect wildlife. And especially again, like as mentioned, like now we are in this climate justice. We are also claiming on loss and damage fund. We are also asking international organization, UN system, and applying polluters pay principle, asking them for financial investment and therefore empowerment, even to how to negotiate for this kind of language, and also for carbon, for example, carbon trade or claiming the loss and damage is critical, and therefore training is very much important part, so that court can play a critical role, not only deciding the case, but also putting law into a place with practical realization. And lots of reluctancy on implementation is another challenge. As a result, we are having some cases on contempt, but again, establishing contempt is very, very hard, for which we are now asking why court's decision is not implemented. And we also have established a directorate for execution of the judgment, and I think we have to put lots of effort and look for the creative solution, engaging the responsible stakeholders, so that not only law but judgments are translated in the life of the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Well, in my last presentation, I just mentioned some challenges with this new law, as I was saying, but specifically in terms of climate change, I think the law, this new law, it's solid. It's a solid foundation, but of course, some gaps, as I mentioned it, that we must maybe with the MoFAI it will be an alternative to improve. One of the cases is climate financing. The laws, climate specific measures. As I mentioned, there are no explicit provisions for carbon sequestration projects or integration with broader climate change policies, such as Mozambique commitment under international agreement like Paris Agreement. As I mentioned before, this have to do also with these clauses that are inserted in this ISDS clauses and IIA. Well, I'm a judge. I will not explain you what is that, but of course I believe you understand. But the thing is, these clauses are the limitation for us to improve in terms of our legislations. Incentives also for private sector engagement, although Article 71 specifies some mechanisms to encourage private sector participation in terms of afforestation and reforestation for climate benefits, are not detailed. Well, in terms of recommendation, I would say strengthening the enforcement. It means increased resources and training for forest patrols and also law enforcement. UNEP is also our partner in Mozambique for training judges, prosecutors, and also the forest patrols. My experience in my country is that our Judicial Training Institute also collaborate on training local communities, paralegals, and enforce and strengthening the community's involvement in terms of patrol and the activities within the forest. Just to mention an example that we were financed by a Swiss Developed Corporation. We create this, let's say, community fund with the local communities, and we also create this platform that the communities, they can report events that can put in branch with the forest. So in this platform, there will be, of course, judges are not there, but the police, the legal aid, the prosecutors, and other stakeholders, they are all connected in this platform, and the population, the communities, they can denounce and they can report ongoing events in terms of protecting the forest. Climate financing, it's also a recommendation that it can be put in place to attract carbon offset projects and ensure community benefits equitable. So this is my contribution in terms of climate change. Thank you. Are you going there also? Judges, normally they talk sitting, yeah? But here they want.
So far as the issue of effectiveness or adequacy of the laws to deal with the climate changes is concerned, in my opening remark I said that so far as India is concerned, we have a robust framework of laws to tackle the preservation of issue of damage of forest or preservation of climate, improvement of this. Yes, the issue do arise, and it's in fact this is something, it's an evolving process, because as the complexity of issues come up, the courts go deep into the issues, and then they find that yes, there is a gap somewhere, and when gap is noticed, a solution is to be found. Either the court issues directions or the advice is issued to the state to come up with the proper legislation. So far as India is concerned, in the opening remark I said that yes, we have our constitution where it's recognized right to clean air or healthy environment is recognized as a fundamental right. Then we have the directive principles of the state policy, we have the fundamental duties of the citizens, all this relating to the protection of the environment and preservation of the forest. We have the laws in place, but in course of time, when the things develop, when the issues are examined, the gaps noticed. Therefore, the National Environment Policy 2006 was issued by the government of India to cover up those gaps, to fill up those gaps, the lacunas which were noticed in the meanwhile. There are, when we apply as a court, as a judge, we apply the principle, precautionary principle we apply. We apply the principle of intergenerational equity, or we apply the public trust doctrine. Then we face difficulty, yes. The gaps are noticed there when applying these principles. These are very wide principles. They confer responsibility upon the judges, upon the institution to ensure that the next generation, it doesn't suffer because of the gaps in the laws. So there the role of judiciary comes up. There the gaps are noticed. There the courts, they come forward, they play proactive roles. And then this take measures, whatever is within their jurisdiction, to ensure that something is done to fill up those gaps. And nowadays the states are sensitive to the issues And they come up with their solutions, they come up with the legislation, we come up with the notifications. So this is how the entire system works. And so far as I can say in the context of India, I gave the example of one case which is still pending and which is kept pending by the court for last 29 years. And in that process, the directions are issued, the gaps are noticed, and an attempt has been made to fill up those gaps. So that's what the national level we are feeling. Yes, in the international levels, the MoFAI is now it's a very praiseworthy effort to ensure that the model forest law is there, available for adoption according to the need of a particular nation. So that is what something is very useful, going to be useful in long time to come. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. I would like to also same with Elisa that to make a training for judges in Indonesia. The judges must be learn from the senior judges. So, but not only learn from the senior judges in national in Indonesia, but we also learn from the ASEAN country, from the Asia Pacific. So collaboration is important for judges in Indonesia to implement related with how to protect, how to implement the forest law. So we are aware that the law is powerful tools that can be used to save the forest. And the problem is how to strengthening forest law in Indonesia. There are available material law and procedural law, including Supreme Court regulation related to the guideline to how to handle the environmental cases, including the forest cases. But also important for the judges, they must have smart and integrity. So this because this issue about corruption, including judicial bribery, is still a problem. And I will explain about 3 cases in Indonesia that implements of strict liability and also some principle that we learned in the certification for environmental judges. The first is a case about Waringin Agrojaya. Waringin Agrojaya is the company that was sued by the Minister of Environment and Forestry for the forest fire occurred on its palm oil concession. The lawsuit was brought under strict liability provision or liability without fault. The court granted the request and stated that the plaintiff activity on the concession is qualifies as abnormally dangerous activity. Hence, strict liability is applicable. The Minister of Environment and Forestry asked the court to order the defendant to pay compensation of IDR 988 million for the release of 10,000 hectares and also 345 million Indonesian rupiah for the losses of the carbon sink, which equal to 3,800 hectares on February in 2017. The District Court of South Jakarta ruled in favor of the plaintiff and held the defendant strictly liable for compensation of IDR 173 billion Indonesian rupiah. And the Jakarta Court of Appeal upheld the lower court rulings. And on August 2018, the Supreme Court also upheld the District Court ruling. The second case is Minister of Environment and Forestry versus PT Merbabu Pelalawan. This is also the company. This case involves violation by PT Merbabu, consists of once logging of forest outside of the permit area, and second, carrying out forest logging inside the permit location in a manner that violates the law. In the lawsuit, the government argued that the defendant action has resulted in the release of carbon, which resulted in the need to restore the degraded forest in order to undo the carbon release. In adjudicating this case, the panel of the judges considered that in the event of scientific uncertainty, the application of the precautionary principle must be ensured by the judiciary. The panel of judges also recognized that forest utilization activities must be subject to the precautionary principle, because when a forest is damaged, it cannot be restored and to its original state. The third case is power plant Tanjung Jati. This case is a lawsuit from the environmental organization or NGO against environmental permit of Tanjung Jati. This is a coal-fired power plants. By interpreting precautionary principle and sustainable development as one of the good environmental government principle, the court revoked Tanjung Jati as environmental permit on the basis of the absence of climate change impact analysis in the plant's environmental impact analysis, EIA. Even though this case is not directly related to the forestry sector, this case has proven that it is important for the court to consider various environmental law principles as a basis or guideline in handling cases related to the environment. Moving forward, we hope that such practice shall be applied in adjudicating forest and land use cases, especially when it's related to examining an administrative decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for those responses to those questions. Unfortunately, we have only just about 5 more minutes before we need to move to the closing of the session. So with those last 5 minutes, I do want to ask one more question, if any of you have a response to that, which, we've discussed a lot about the gaps in the laws, and then Judge Bama, I think this sort of is a good transition to this last question, where I want to ask if you could mention, even only just 1 minute, what is an example of a good practice that you think a court could adopt in order to ensure the best implementation and enforcement of forest laws? Are there any particular practices that the courts can adopt as this sort of last piece of the chain that Justice Lavrieson mentioned, in taking the law and really turning it toward effective implementation and enforcement? One recommendation you have for courts to do that, if you have just 1 minute each.
I would say follow the example of the Indonesian court by deciding on the size of compensation and restoration which is needed to take into account also the carbon sink and the sequestration issue.
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, complexity of these laws is something that we will not solve only with training. My colleague here, the director, will agree with me. So I think it's important to involve other agencies that deals with the scientific part of the issues, because otherwise what we are facing in courts in terms of decision, at least in my country, it judges coming with technicalities or judicial procedures. They are not looking at the facts because they don't have the proper expertise. So if we, in terms of training, we can improve the knowledge and also grant the enforcement of these laws if we involve other agencies, whether on the trainings with the different stakeholders, judges also training them there. It will be difficult with Supreme Court judges, but at least for the first instance courts, it's important to prepare them and to let them interact with other agencies, including civil society and also local.
On the issue of levy of compensation or penalty when the illegal felling of trees is done, my suggestion would be that instead of calculating the compensation or penalty on the basis of the value of timber or adopting traditional method, we should go for calculating the value of the loss which is suffered on account of the loss of stored carbon. A value should be assigned, indexing should be done, and on that basis the penalty or compensation should be fixed.
Okay, I think the more important when judges implement many important principle in environmental law. So the important thing that judges must hard thinking about how to implement of intergenerational equity and aware about how the next generation will be live in a health and a good environment. I think that's if all judges think about it, they will search the material of law to strengthening their argumentation in the decision. Thank you.
There are, benchmark, but also I think sometimes we need to learn why we have failed to implement. So, and then we were just analyzing some time back in the court, especially we have a case like Godavari marble case, which was decided 20 years back, but even now the judgment has not been implemented. So we were looking for why not implemented. So I think we also need to learn from why we failed. And but there are also examples where judgment has been implemented. For example, the Nisgard judgment on airport construction, government has implemented. They have formed a expert group, and they have been working on looking for the alternates to mitigate the harm that may that may happen to the forest or wildlife. So there are both kind of examples. But the other examples on why we failed, what we have done right now is sometimes we judges also sit and decide on utopia. Maybe that is the assumption they have. So instead, we are trying to invite the responsible stakeholder and asking even the applicant or the other parties who have a duty to give what would be the best alternate. So that is how we are engaging the groups, and that is what we did in a case that I shared in a Pakistani pavilion on Sagarmatha case, where we have tried to call all the concerned stakeholders and come up with a plan. And they have come up with the not only plan but also activities and budget required even to implement those activities. Engaging the responsible stakeholder can also help or facilitate for effective implementation.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. Let's have a round of applause for all of our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for that rich discussion on the role of the judiciary. It's really a phenomenal luxury for all the rest of us to have the opportunity to hear from judges from 5 different countries and all of the work that your courts are doing on the implementation of forest law. So thank you so much for all of these comments. Please feel free to return to your seats. So before moving to the closing of this event this afternoon, I would just like to thank all of you for being here, and I would like to give a special thanks to all of the partners that have worked together in putting this event together and in putting together the Forest Pavilion. So thank you to the UN Forum on Forests for hosting us here in the Forest Pavilion within the SDGs Pavilion. I would also like to thank the Asian Development Bank, the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, the UN Environment Program, specifically the Law Division of the UN Environment Program, and the International Council of Environmental Law, and all the others who have worked together to put this together. So now, at the conclusion of our event, after hearing all of that discussion about how judges play a role, and we've heard a lot about how the judges, are a very important constituency in trying to continue the development of forest law, and so are an important aspect of this dialogue on the Model Forest Act initiative is how to write laws that are really done with effective enforcement and implementation in mind so that they can be used effectively in the judiciary. So for the conclusion of our event, I'd like to turn now to introduce Professor Christina Voigt, who's a professor at the University of Oslo and the chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, and also one of the first co-chairs of the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee. Please, Dr. Voigt, go ahead and come on up here, and we'd love to hear your remarks.
Thank you, Professor Breiner. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure being here as the chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, because we have been partnering with all these wonderful institutions and organizations for several years now in the Model Forest Act initiative. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Is that my fault? Or better not touch. It's an absolute pleasure to follow the development of that very important piece of work. And I've seen its initiation many years ago when Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin was my predecessor, the chair of the IUCN World Commission. It's a very busy task to be, and I remember him talking about, we should work on a Model Forest Act, but I just don't have the time. And then sure enough, by the time he had some time, I don't know where you take the time from, Justice Benjamin, he initiated the initiative and has been the intellectual leader together with a wonderful, wonderful group of experts. So thanks for cooperating with the World Commission on Environmental Law in this important endeavor. Being here at COP29 talking about climate change, there is absolutely no scenario for holding warming to 1.5 degrees with no or limited overshoot, and we need to talk about overshoot soon, I'm sure. There is no scenario for holding warming to 1.5 degrees without bringing forests into the picture. Not as an alternative to steep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from other sectors, in particular energy and transport, not as a substitute, but as something that is complementary. CO2 removals in forest sinks and reservoirs are crucial to reach net zero CO2 emissions around 2050 and net negative emissions thereafter. And for this, halting and reversing forest loss by 2030 is absolutely necessary, as the decision from the global stocktake last year in Dubai clearly stated. In addition, of course, forests are a lot more than carbon sinks. They are home to 90% of terrestrial biodiversity. They provide livelihoods to many forest-dependent communities and indigenous peoples. They provide income if ecologically sustainably managed. And in order to get that right, and it's a lot to get right, the law governing forests is absolutely crucial. The law is front and center for spatial planning, for usage and tenure rights, for ecologically sustainable management, and for forest conservation, and so much more. MoFAI, the Model Forest Act initiative, is unique in this regard because it seeks to provide a toolbox, or how do you call it, a shopping cart, something to choose from, publicly accessible and available, for doing many different things, for revising or amending forest laws, for providing a list of very important principles. And we've heard the judges talking about how important principles are in their work. Principles like in dubio pro silva, the ecological foundation or function of property, non-regression, or the precautionary principle, and a whole list of legal tools and instruments, but also modalities for enhancing the effective implementation and compliance with the Model Acts, as well as means to attract finance and funding, absolutely crucial for protecting forests. For example, payment for ecosystem services, loans, bonds, subsidies, and much more. Protecting forests is a complex matter, and there is no silver bullet to do so. But with the help of MoFAI, there is an instrument which can be applied to the relevant national circumstances of each individual forest country as each country sees it fit. And this will be important for many years to come. Many countries already include forests in their nationally determined contributions, and hopefully even more will do so in their 2025 NDCs. In line with the expectations that NDCs will progress beyond the current ones and will reflect each party's highest possible ambition, this includes, of course, for many countries, also forests. It is our hope, from the perspective of the World Commission on Environmental Law, that MoFAI will play a crucial role in enabling countries to raise ambition, to raise action, to raise finance, and to raise enforcement and compliance capacity in order to protect forests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Voigt, for giving us much to think about. And I don't think there are many more important topics at this entire COP than to discuss ways in which really to raise ambition and raise international cooperation on the protection of forests. So now for the last word, let me turn the time back over to the chair of MoFAI and the president of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, Chief Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin from the National High Court of Brazil.
Well, many thanks to all of you. I don't have much to say after the closing statement by Christina Voigt that summarized everything that we do and we expect to do with MoFAI, with the different panels that we had, experts, United Nations organizations, judges, environmental law centers. The whole world was here in this debate. And I think it's the first time that we present MoFAI in a COP. And we didn't do last year in Dubai, although I did mention a few times, because we didn't know whether we would succeed, whether in those 3 years we would progress as much as necessary to deliver in July 2026 the final product. In Belém, in COP30, we'll be presenting the text, but it's not the final text, and it will not come with the commentaries. The commentaries will be draft or presented in with the final text. Although I have to say, it's a parenthesis that the group is already working on the commentaries, but the commentaries will be changing in accordance to the change in the text that we are preparing. Our next activity is in Brazil in the last week of January 2025. We will start with 2 days in Rio, drafting, basically the drafting committee. Then we move to Brasilia, 1 more day of drafting, but with the Brazilian experts and diplomats. 2 of them are here with us. And also 1 day of consultation, as I mentioned earlier today. And we do hope that between Brasilia and Belém, we'll have the consultation in the Congo Basin. If we do it, and we expect to do it, then we have covered the 3 main tropical biomes of the world. Of course, there are temperate forests, and one thing that I didn't mention is that MoFAI, although it's the Model Forest Act initiative, it doesn't cover just forests, but flora, native flora. The correct title for MoFAI would have been the Model Flora Act instead of the Model Forest Act. But the Brazilian Forest Act is exactly like this. It's called the Forest Act, but in the first provision, it states that the regime that is put there, the principles, the instruments, the objectives, the institutions, also apply to all other types of native vegetations, all the way from grasslands to the canopy of the forest, mangroves, you name it, it's flora, it's included in the text. So this is basically the roadmap. Again, many thanks to our host here in this pavilion, the United Nations Forum on Forest, our fabulous partners, and especially those 2 people that I have already thanked in the opening. I'll do again in the closing. Christina Pack, who's sitting back there, and Professor Nicholas Breiner. So join me in thanking them, the UNFF team, and every other organization that is a part of this effort. We have the chair of WCL here with us, and the other organizations that either helped in organizing or were present here, bringing their contribution to MoFAI. All the best, and please wish us all the best too. Thank you.